449 Water Street in Saugatuck. I know that tonight on the agenda is to discuss the changes to the outdoor expanded, I'm not even sure what really we're calling it these days, but the outdoor, and I know at I think it was planning commission meeting, there was some dates that were thrown around randomly, and I just want to voice that the dates that currently are April 1 to November 1. I don't think those should be changed. I think those are fine. Most restaurants, businesses put their stuff out when they think their business is going to pick up. You therefore get the money for those months or weeks or whatever. So I was just a little, listening to the meeting, a little freaked out that people were just going to change the dates without any type of conversation with any other thing. So I'm fine with May 1 to November 1, but October is a really big month here. I know it can snow, totally get the snow situation. I don't think any business wants their stuff out in the snow, nor does any business in this town want to deter the park and recreation not be able to clean up our town. So I don't think that any of the businesses would work if there was all of a sudden a snowstorm and we had to pull everything in by some fluke thing in October. There would be more than enough people that would be healthy and ready for that to happen. So I think October is definitely a month we need. obviously everyone knows it's apple picking and all the fun things that people come up here for the fall to do here. So I just encourage you to really look at the dates and hopefully vote on the dates that they currently are, which is April 1 to November. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Christine. And just for the recording purposes, Councilmember Muncy has joined us, so we do have a full contingent of the city council here for this meeting. Jamie, please make a note of that as well. Welcome. Anybody else in the audience wishes to offer public comment?
Dan Fox. This is about 6A, Goose Prize, the airport property. You are all, or should be all, aware of my views on the importance of an upfront strategic look what becomes of that property. Then made it twice in person here and put it in the newspaper, and it's in your pack. Some have said to me, well, you want to sell the property, and it's not accurate. I don't hold that view. I don't have any specific recommendation as to what should happen with that property. But a fellow citizen gave me his thought of an idea he thought should be considered based on a fundamental truth, which is that there's a major, arguably critical sustainability issue for the entire city that could relate to the property. It's expressed, that concern has been expressed and agreed on by local employers, school administrators, police and fire authorities, parents with small children, even some respect invoke her name, Jane Underwood. The issue is this: we live in an affordable housing desert. Teachers can't afford a house. Some firefighters live 30 miles away. Our school population portion of local kids has been falling for years. Bar and restaurant staff people have to commute from Holland and beyond. Everybody, including the tri-community, master plan, knows this problem, has identified this problem, has spoken to this problem, and honestly, nobody's done much about it. Reality is we're victims of our property values. Median Sagatuck house cost is the latest number I got off the internet, $950,000. But where's affordable housing going to come from, given our built-out nature in the city? I mean, 4 lots available. The airport property, or some portion of it, my friend said to me, could possibly be developed by a public-private venture. There are affordable housing grants available, including grants for eco-friendly development, which could see trails, ecological common sense, and whatever incorporated into a master development. A park-like setting for well-planned, affordable housing development, I'd say that's one strategic use for the property that the city council needs to study before any decision is made to proceed down a specific course of action. And that's the point. In my letter, I mentioned horse ahead of the cart, with the risk of fire-ready aim and getting to aim way too late. So, for what it's worth, thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Is there anyone else in the audience? Please approach.
Good afternoon. My name is Kenneth Butler. I'm here also with Jim Searing. We're both on the Sagatuck Township Parks and Rec Board. I'm also on the Planning Commission. And we are redrafting our zoning rules and regulations. One of the things we are going to be hopefully adopting, it's been proposed that in areas other than this property, we are going to downsize the required lot size and square footage necessary for the house to address that problem. This property is currently zoned A2. It requires 2.5 acres and at least 1,000 square foot house. That has not been disposed to have any changes whatsoever. So you still have a lot that the township has the same problem as the city. The lot is too big for affordable housing. We may have that in other areas. And the other thing I'll specify is that I've spoken to the city manager, and while developing it and putting a number of houses there, would be a huge amount of income to the township. With the Parks and Rec Commission and the manager, we really hope to start down the road and at least exploring what the property looks like, the trails. I have walked it, Jim has walked it. We've been dragged around by John Grangebeek several times. And, to develop that property would be a crime. And I think you at least need to let the citizens of Saugatuck see what an absolute gem they have to take.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else in the audience who wishes to offer public comment?
Hi, I'm Marcia Casper, resident of Saugatuck. I support utilizing the airport property as a trail system for the benefit and use of the citizens of Saugatuck, its tourists, the tri-community, and future generations. I read the ecological evaluation and sustainability evaluation completed by the Outdoor Discovery Center. Both of these reports are compelling for keeping the natural beauty, watershed, and sustainability benefits of the 154-acre airport property. I also attended the SOAR analysis public meeting on October 23rd of this year, and that is strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results. The overwhelming response of attendees was to keep the property intact and to begin by opening up the existing trail. Another outcome is to look at the value to Saugatuck residents of the compost and yard waste site the property offers versus shipping these materials elsewhere. Addressing the issue of selling or developing the property. Selling the property or developing it is forever. Once sold or developed, it is gone for current residents and generations to come. You would be trading decades of future use for a one-time dollar amount, and we're not talking multi-millions. We always have the opportunity to sell should a trail system and light to heavy recreational use not pan out. This is an opportunity to work with the township, the CVB, and other stakeholders to create a natural, beautiful recreational asset for residents and visitors of the tri-community area. And I would even add the quad community area, including Penville. Let's give it a chance. I support a motion to open this property for trails and growing from there as interest dictates. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to offer public comment? I see no further takers in the audience. I will open it up to the Zoom. Anyone that wishes to offer public comment on agenda items, please raise your hand and unmute. Jamie, do you see any hands raised? I do not. Okay. With that, we will close public comment. We will have another public comment meeting period later in the meeting. With that, that takes us to our discussion items, 6A. The first item is the airport property recommendation. You'll find it on page 2. And before we begin as a council, I would like to impose upon our city attorney just to give us some guidance on, as a council, discussing valuations of city assets. I want to make sure we're very careful about this.
Of course. So at this stage, with no present appraisal of the property, my recommendation would be to maybe stray away from making any specific conjecture or guesses as to what the value of the real property is. We don't know what direction the city's going to go, what position it's going to take relative to the property. And I think it might be potentially harmful to have those statements by the council potentially used against it if it does in fact in the future consider selling the property.
Thank you for that, council. Appreciate it. Of course. So with that, Ryan, do you want to kick this off? We got you on the agenda for this one. Okay.
Happy to do so, Mr. Mayor, and thank you. And then I'll lead in and then pass it off to Councilwoman Baldwin, who's the chairperson of the Parks and Public Works Committee. But before I do that, I do want to congratulate our clerk, Jamie, and city staff and the volunteers, election workers on a safe and successful election. So thank you so much. A lot of work goes into that. So with that, the city of Saugatuck has revisited a discussion, which has been going on for decades about the airport property. But most recently, 15 years recently, there was a study in '09, which is included in your packet, page 37. And they did an analysis. Williams and Works did a analysis, and hopefully you've had a chance to review that. And so the Parks and Public Works Committee has reintroduced this discussion, and they've hired some excellent help with the Outdoor Discovery Center, which has done a sustainability and ecological review of the property. All that information is included in your packet. As mentioned during the public comment, there has been a SOAR analysis. And thanks, Marcia, for mentioning the words, which is strengths, opportunity, aspirations, and results. And that was pretty telling based on that meeting. And so the Parks and Public Works Committee is making a recommendation. It's a very simple recommendation, quite frankly. It's very focused to just activate the existing trails. And I think that's just very simply what's being asked for the council to review and possibly take action on. And the action is going to be, if approved by council, to allow staff to do their due diligence on reviewing what is involved in activating the existing trails. And I have some bullet points on what that would mean from a staff perspective. And then it includes, is the property currently insured? And then at what levels? I mean, these are questions I don't know, like, if we activate the space, do we have to heighten our insurance? The answer is probably yes. ADA requirements, right? Accessibility requirements and accommodations. Because this space has not been open to the public, so that's something that needs to be reviewed. Standards for trail maintenance, that's super important, especially for our Department of Public Works staff, right? So we activate this space, which is not being maintained currently by our Department of Public Works. What does that actually mean? For example, if a tree falls over a trail, is the expectation that we immediately get out there and, chop up the tree and get it off the trail? Are there trip hazards? Just standards of maintenance. And with that comes a staff complement. Parking accommodations, right? So we open up this to the public, like, okay, what are the expectations for parking? Is it open during the winter? Do we have to plow? Do we close the gates? Those types of items. And then hours of operation. And then also, as mentioned, there are some zoning concerns. That too has to be reviewed. If we open up the trails, do we have to work with the township on getting permission from the township on zoning if it's open to the public? Something that I don't think that's ever been reviewed. So the recommendation is there, but I will entertain any questions, but then pass it off to Ms. Baldwin. No questions?
Thank
Ms.
you.
Baldwin.
Yeah, so not to belabor the point, but first to talk about this came to PPW, and I have the privilege of chairing the Parks and Public Works Committee. And to me, it just seems like a simple request. Property belongs to the citizens of Saugatuck. Right now, if they enter the property, they would be trespassing. You don't know what you have until you can see it. It just seems a very simple request. The trails exist. We'd like to utilize them. And at this point, we're not even coming to council with a dollar request. We're simply asking for staff to be allowed to, as Ryan went through his bullet point, look into it, what would be involved, and then that comes to council. Nothing will be done on the trails. It doesn't go to council. PPW does not have the latitude to make to spend funds without council approval. So at this point, it's just really just a matter of what it would take to open this up to the public so people can see what we have there. I've seen it. It's absolutely beautiful.
and I just think that it's time for us to do that. I don't think that we're asking for a lot, and, simple request, and, I'd really appreciate your vote today. to do that.
Or Monday.
Monday, rather, correct.
Great, thank you very much. Any discussion among the council?
Sure, I'd love to, if I could.
Please.
All right. So, a lot of people are interested in this property. Everybody has talked about everything from affordable, attainable housing, an RV campground, sports fields, a community center, like everybody has great ideas. Lots of ideas are coming to the table. But what we're deciding right now is just to open it up to the public, right? This is just nothing, we are not closing the door on any idea at this.
There is nothing that we are looking at doing right now that we are requesting that would preclude any other future use of that property. That's correct. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I should have stated that.
And then just something specific, when I was reading through all of the things, the former senior center, that still exists?
It does.
Okay. It's like I saw information on the 2009
Yeah.
research, but I
It looks
felt
a
like
little different now. but
it
it's
looks a
still there.
little different now. Okay, okay.
Correct.
And I understand that it doesn't take a whole lot to get that back into function if you needed to function as a building or,
Mhm.
I don't know, the future of having events out there or something like that,
It's,
any kind of.
the 2009 pictures, make it look better than it is. Yeah, to be honest, we went inside there and it's,
Oh,
But there's workable plumbing out there?
my biggest question is, if you've gotten, either of you, if you've had an initial read from Superintendent Herbert on if his staff have been, to do some of these things that are being proposed. I mean, has he given you an initial reaction? I'd ask him myself if he's here, but,
Yeah, so that's part of the due diligence.
Okay.
Right? We'd have to review that, and that really comes down to the standard of care for the trails and the parking accommodations, so staff will bring back a recommendation if we need a staff complement, an additional staff complement, we'll present that to council.
And if I may, and I don't want to speak for Superintendent Herbert, but he and I have discussed this at length, and one of the things that I've said to him is, I'm like, to me, it seems no different than what kind of work are you doing on the John Woolen Trail, right? There's no bathroom at the John Woolen Trail, to me, there's not even trash there. So it's really, at this point, very basic. The trails are already existing. Let's get those legitimized. I understand it probably doesn't cost a lot. I'm still looking for private funds, but I think it's possible that I can do that. I'm not going too much into detail about that because I don't, until I have something, I don't like to bring it. So right now, it's just really just the early stages. What would it take? And how would we go about it? And can we authorize Ryan to spend a little time doing it? That's all we're asking right now.
okay, yeah, no, I know when I toured it with Scott, he said, well, I do need somebody would need somebody to unlock it, lock it, and if there's a car there, then we have to wait until the car leaves to unlock, to relock it, I need a trash receptacle. So there are some things I would want to make sure I would just want to make sure we wouldn't overburden staff, but it sounds like your due diligence will cover that for us.
Correct, Mr. Mayor, and I think we just want to manage expectations.
Okay, very good. Go ahead, Russ.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Dean. Appreciate all the comments about the airport property. I want to emphasize this is not a park. It has never been a city park. It's a city asset, which is owned by the city for, I think, probably 80 years. It's been used for various purposes. There've been suggestions over the years. One was a golf course development out there at one time. So there's been a lot of discussion about it, but it's pretty much been dormant from a public knowledge standpoint. As a matter of fact, most citizens in town, if you say, go to the airport property, they say, okay, where?
I agree with that.
By the dog park. Probably the best way to describe it. So, this is a priority discussion in my opinion, and the city has a lot of other priorities that we've made strategic importance of. Bald Head Park, Park Street, other city parks, the dune area out at Oval Beach, which has not had much attention. I've had several citizens that have asked me, who's maintaining the trails out there? There's some signs that need some help. So I question the priority of this. Not the overall idea, but the priority of this and everything else the city staff has on their plates. I talked with Superintendent Herbert about this too. Any work done out there will come at the expense of other city projects. There is not enough bandwidth, if that's the right word to use, to appropriately maintain what's not even a park yet and turn it into a park. It's going to be a whole nother level of responsibility for the city and the staff, which will be incumbent on us to manage appropriately, cost-wise, and operationally. So my position on this is I want to have this conversation. I think this is a great conversation. I do not support a motion to simply open up the trails because that will open up a whole range of issues that the city, as the manager has expressed, would be of concern to us as a city from a safety standpoint, make sure it's used appropriately. This has not been a priority for the city for a number of years for various reasons. I don't see the urgency behind making this a priority at this point. I am open to the conversation. I think the city council, especially with new council members coming on board, should hold off on that conversation until they join this, until they join this team. And then let's have a strategic discussion about the airport property from a city asset standpoint before we make any decisions about current use. Aside from the dumping of leaves and brush and things of that nature. There's a whole range of questions around that too. And I want to thank John for mentioning that it would be an additional city cost if you were no longer able to use the property for that purpose. A lot of questions, a lot of discussion, and I think it's incumbent on us as a council to take this as a policy discussion as opposed to just opening up some simple trails. I appreciate and respect where Councilmember Baldwin's coming from. It seems very simple, but in my experience, this will be a very complex thing to do. And I'm not sure it's the best use for the city. I don't know if it should be sold. I don't know what the value of the property is. And as the attorney said, I don't want to make any conjecture around that until we have some more information. To me, this is something that we do as a policy, as a council first, before we allow any additional uses aside from what we're doing today.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead, Don.
Yeah, with all due respect, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. Basically, we are basically looking to give the staff the approval to move forward to investigate all these questions and to come back to council, whether it's this current body or the new body, who again can walk and chew gum at the same time. So it's basically pretty simple. Manager Heiss already laid it out very clearly what's going to happen. There's no opening it right away. There's no clearing of trails right away. There's nothing right away. It's just literally, let's do our due diligence and then bring it back to council. And that's the kind of information that this body and the citizens of the city deserve.
Yeah, go, you
May
go.
I just,
Yeah, please.
can I clarify that? We are not voting on Monday to open the trails.
Correct. That's correct,
Right.
yeah.
And I have to agree with you, Mr. Gardner, that, it is certainly worth a discussion. However, we do need this information here, that you'll be getting for us, manager will be getting for us to gather to have that, what kind of time frame do you think it would be before, we would have any recommendation? It probably wouldn't be until at least a month or so, right?
6 to 12 years.
But you know what I mean? I
Yeah.
think by the time any recommendation
have to go
came,
back
it would be,
Yeah.
it would be a month or two before you
Oh,
had all that information.
Yeah, at least 2 months.
Yeah, right, that's what I mean. So,
If I may, so what would happen is that he would bring the information to PPW, PPW would have a discussion, then make a motion, bring the next thing to council, PPW only meets once a month, so this would push it out to at least a couple of months before we make any kind of recommendation.
so it's really not, it's opening it up. It's more like, well, let's see what it's gonna
Exploring
take to open it up, and
Yes.
we're allowing
That's
the
all it is.
time that it's going to
And there's
take
not
to
even a dollar
investigate
amount
it. Yeah.
attached to it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, makes sense.
I would just weigh in. I agree with Lauren. It's a field of dreams. I've been at many dinner party or cocktail party where someone has an idea that they want to discuss. I love the idea of beginning the discussion and just looking at it from a feasibility standpoint. I think that's very kind to our staff. We're trying to be very conscientious of how we're spending staff time and tax dollars. But I love the idea of people beginning to talk about it, beginning to experience that property. And no matter what happens with it, I think it's good for people to experience it or have the possibility of experience it as we're sort of opening the idea and walking into it. So
I would agree with that, and I think that, again, with government, we talk a lot about transparency. What could be more transparent than figuring out what it takes to get citizens out there to see it and see what it is and then form an opinion? One of the things people say all the time is, I don't even know where it is. I agree. I think that that's a shame that people don't know where it is because they own it. But all this is at this point It's just authorizing, city staff to conduct some due diligence. We are not even opening the trails at this point. This is something to bring them back to PPW, and then PPW can make recommendations, and that would be a process. We're just getting the ball rolling.
I think
it would be, you know, interesting to have, you know, an event out there or something, you know, to invite people out to look at it. Have you had, any events like that, you know, just to open it up and maybe have some sketches and some ideas of.
I've been trespassing out there, sure.
Yeah, right. I know, but I mean,
No offense,
just-
but I'm willing to
I'd
share.
like to see more of the interest. I see a lot of folks, and I'm interested in talking about it too, because I see a lot of our constituents that are really interested in it. So of course, it's something we need to, look into. But I'd like to know how many people, you know, are interested. And it'd be neat to hear, you know, maybe a survey on it or something like that, if you guys could do it.
And a SOAR analysis.
Yeah, yeah.
thank,
Oh.
thank you for that, Gregory. I would urge all of you at the table, if you haven't visited it, you know, you are representatives of the city. I don't think there would be any objection, from city staff if you wanted to go with one of, I know the trails. I was privileged to have a tour. I know Garnet was privileged to have a tour. Helen was. Feel free to reach out to any of us if you would like to walk the property, and I don't think. I
I've
don't
had
think
the
we're
privilege
gonna-
of having a tour too, so I'm open to doing that as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Russ.
One more question. What, hasn't there been interest from the high school, from the cross-country
Yep.
team, that, if those work cleared out, this could be a place where the high schoolers could, practice?
Well, indeed, just for the first time ever, I believe, Saugatuck High School cross country team, my daughter being a member of it, they did have a home meet using the township property that the township cleared the trails up with a lot of help from Mr. Vanderbeek, in fact. And it was great. It was right by the dog park. And there was actually a connection between that property and the airport property. There's actually the ability to do a trail. And if you look at the work that Mr. Vanderbeek's done, right, I think you'll see some fairly detailed analysis of what, you know, what the trails are. I've heard from everybody here at the council, and I'm a big believer that more facts and data lead to better decisions. So I'm in favor of having this on the agenda Monday to make a decision if we're going to see the staff. I mean, to me, this does not strike me as something that's going to gridlock city staff for any significant period of time. I think it's a conversation with Superintendent Herbert more than anything. Well,
I see this as being the manager's responsibility to lead this. Yeah, there's quite a few items. I mean, they're listed, right? Insurance, legal review. There's quite a few items. And then I'm glad that you asked the question about the cross country team, because that leads into standard of care of the trails, right? So if you have athletes out there using the trails, you know, you got to make sure that ankles aren't getting turned. And so,
Okay.
perfect question.
All right, well then I'll ask a follow-up to your response then. I mean, you know, is this going to take you off task from some of the big things we've got? I'm thinking some of the big infrastructure projects in town. And is this going to really gridlock you? I mean, that's kind of what I'm curious about. Russ has a point. You know, I don't want you guys off task. We do agree to a strategic plan and, you know.
So this will not displace our Department of Public Works and or city staff. Will use consultants, right? So this will be an insurance review. We'll use legal counsel. So it won't display boots on the ground, so to speak. It's not a big deal for the Department of Public Works.
Okay, well, yeah.
With the exception of, well, when we come back with our recommendation, again, standard of care, what group is maintaining these trails? And once we establish that level of maintenance, that will need to continue, right? It can't ebb and flow, especially with athletes out there using the trail.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Ryan. I mean, for me, that then says it's a modest investment for more information that will lead us as a council to make a better decision. So look forward to discussing this on Monday. Very good. Next item is item B, Park Street stop sign request on page 49 of your packets.
Mr. Mayor, this item also comes from your Parks and Public Works Committee. This is a pretty simple ask, hopefully easier than the airport request. And what they're asking is that, well, they've been, so they have a Park Street Committee, subcommittee. And what they've been looking at is low-hanging fruit to do some traffic calming on Park Street. one of the recommendations that came out of the Parks and Public Works Committee is to look at what the placement of stop signs at a few major intersections. I think the one that they're most focused on is the intersection of Park Street and Campbell Road. I believe also what was discussed is Park and Perryman.
And which is your entrance to Oval Beach. So, Paul, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm pretty much done. So I'll just hand it off to Councilwoman Baldwin at this point.
So again, oh, certainly, I apologize. So yes, thank you. And this came out again out of our most recent Parks and Public Works Committee meeting, where it came up a discussion that, obviously knows that deer are really populated over on the other side of the river right now. Not right now, but it appears to be perpetuity. But Park and Campbell, people want deer signs. What we need is just something to slow traffic. If you're familiar with that, when you come down that hill, it's your natural inclination to kind of pick up speed. And sometimes when you're even trying to turn, I live off of Campbell, when you're trying to turn off of Campbell, you might not get the opportunity with everybody coming back and forth if it's a busy time of day or whatever. So freeway stops, I mean, again, unanimous, passed with our PPW committee to have a freeway stop there. And that also at Oval Beach, the entrance is at Perryman. It's a limited sight distance. Everyone knows how tight it gets up there, especially coming off of Holiday Hill and all of that there. So really just public safety, to me, a very common sense thing. If we want to slow down traffic, we can ask them to stop. And maybe that would save a lot of time for the Douglas police officer who sits right there all day long and waits to pop people for tickets. Yeah. So that's all. So yes, I would ask your consideration for it to look into this, please.
Thanks. Any questions from council?
Yeah, Mayor Dean, to help me understand the process, this is unusual request. This is not something we hear from citizens typically is, hey, I'd like a stop sign at a certain intersection. So I just want to understand what is the normal protocol for requesting safety improvements, things of that nature for our streets. Immediately what comes to mind is engineers, traffic engineering, as well as the police would have some say on this. I don't know whether I stop, and I ride that intersection every single day on my bike, so I know exactly how the traffic flows. I've got a lot of experience over there. I don't know if a stop sign would solve a problem. What problem are we trying to solve? I think is where
So
I'm going with
again,
this.
this is just to conduct due diligence to look into the installation. So this is not us going out there and pounding a stop sign right away. And to answer your question, yes, if you meet with the people on Park Street, which I do all the time, and I'm on their committee, everybody that you meet with over there is clamoring for a stop sign. We see a lot of near misses. We see right now there is no pedestrian right of way on that street. It's very dangerous. I live on that side of the river. If I want to go to Mount Baldhead, I drive because I'm worried about being hit by a car. So, I mean, I respect that you get down there on your bike and whatever, but I live there. I enter that intersection all the time. There are two very natural places that just make common sense to have some throughway stops, and I just think it's a long time overdue. And we're just asking to be able to look into it. Like I said, not walk right out there and hammer in a sign. Look into it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead, Member Lewis.
Well, this has been a request from Park Street residents for years. I can't remember Neil's last name, but Neil Report. Thank you. He was requesting this, 2018, maybe even sooner than that. And then when Holly and I got on council, we walked up and down that. There's a difference, for folks who live that every day, every minute of every day, it is quite, it can be quite treacherous. And, what's nice about the Parks and Public Works Committee is you have a couple of members, at least one who lived there and experienced that every day. And this is coming from your body of citizens who are there. And so they're really basically following up on the conversations that they're having with residents that they live with who are requesting this and have been requesting this. And again, it's a due diligence act, just to begin the process to see what we need to do to get us to that point. It's not a difficult lift.
And thank you, Councilmember Lewis. My point is that this is an engineering and police study as opposed to a public request. I'm sure there's other citizens in town who like stop signs and directional signs at other intersections as well. So my goal would be is to, identify the problem that's trying to be solved, number one. Number two, is this the appropriate solution for the problems that people are experiencing?
That's the due diligence part of the motion.
And I would rely simply on the engineers and the police, not public opinion.
No, I just think part of the due diligence is talking to police and talking to engineers.
Might come back and they
It might
say
come
no.
back and
It
they'll
might-
say, no, you can't do it. I
Possible.
mean, but let's
Um,
just find out.
Can't keep ignoring the citizens that have been clamoring for
All right,
it.
let's get, Gregory, your.
It is an odd request. First time I've heard it. Of course, but it's certainly worth looking into. Now, I do drive those roads several times a week. I go through both of those roads. And I'd like to know also, are we having accidents? Is there a lot more problems than usual? Personally, I never have a problem turning left or right out of both of those areas, and maybe because I'm so used to the area. But I go up and down Campbell, you know that several times a week. You'll see me in that Mill Pond vehicle a lot. And of course, going to Oxbow, we have a house back there. So I'm driving those roads and I know they're narrow. But a stop sign, that's a pretty big request. But again, we're just asking, to spend the time to look at it. You'll be working with engineers and of course, probably getting opinions from our sheriff and Douglas Police Department as well, I'm sure. So that's all this is. This is not approving anything that would come to us before anything happens. So I think it's worth considering when we're talking about, there's enough people in Park Street that have that concern, so.
Holly, any observations?
I would say, what have we done for Park Street lately? I mean,
Right.
since I was elected, 4 years ago, it's that, Park Street has always complained that, come on, guys, like, what are you doing? What are you doing for us? And Park Street, as, Gary Medler always says, it's the entrance to Oval Beach. It's one of the most heavily traveled streets. We all know it's narrow. I mean, the issues are legion, right? I mean, that's probably why nothing happened, because it's a very difficult knot to untangle. But obviously, there's a confluence of people getting off the chain ferry, people on bikes, strollers. We've got people moving towards our most popular assets in our city. And so these are things that we need to respond to. I think that having a study, talking to police, talking to engineers I think we know them.
Thank you.
I think Jane Underwood would be very happy to see. the work.
A couple, well, a question, yeah,
Right.
a question for the manager and then an observation. What was the process that we used for the speed signs, the radar signs?
Great question. So we did try to set some parameters around that because that request becomes pretty common, right? People like those speed radar signs and certain neighborhoods would love to see them. And so we did rely on the sheriff's department on data to bring that in front of council. So we did set some parameters. I think there's even a policy that we set around that. And then you didn't ask this question, but the council did approve city staff to look at no parking signs on top of the hill. If you recall, the gentleman came in, a resident, making that request. He had some line of sight issues, he was placing stones in the area. So we've already committed to doing that. That's on our radar. That's on our list to do. So I think.
Mute my audio. I can't hear it. But that's your microphone, it's not there.
So I would just marry this request with the stop sign and no parking sign request on top of the hill.
Okay, that's helpful.
That's helpful.
I mean, I know, from experience dealing with constituents, they've pointed out safety issues to me. They've, pointed out issues around the high school. They've pointed out issues, with the crossing for the bathroom. And we've taken modest steps. I mean, they weren't, as concrete as, putting a sign in the ground, but, we tried to make it safer for people to cross the street to the restroom from the playground. So we've done things like that before. And for me, this is really an example of the power of the Parks and Public Works Committee. That's why I'm so proud that we established this committee last year. because it is a way to engage with the public and the community. I mean, Helen and I walked Park Street with the people that live there, and it was a valuable experience for me since I don't live on that side of the river to hear from them. And so I do think they have a stake in this. I think, you know, I mean, I respectfully disagree with the comment that, you know, Parks and Public Works needs to be ring fenced around parks. You know, Park Street, the people on Park Street are on a piece of public works and, you know, they're on a roadway, but they are also on a roadway that serves our biggest tourist asset, Oval Beach, which is a huge park and, you know, takes people to parks, takes people to Mount Baldhead Park. So I'm very proud of the work that Parks and Public Work is doing. That's why we set up the committee to make sure we had good representation from people that live on that side of the river. And I see no harm, once again, going back to our previous discussion of gathering more data on this and then making a decision based on a data. But once again, I think the more information, more facts we have, the better decisions we make as a council. So I'm looking forward to this being on the agenda on Monday.
One last comment. So this kind of reminds me of the discussion that was had at council a couple years ago. There was a study that was completed for warrants for traffic lights at certain intersections, including Lake and Blue Star, and then also out in the township at Allegan and Blue Star. And I suspect this is probably going to be a similar process where they have to go through what's called a warrant. There's like 10 warrants for traffic lights. You have to meet the warrants in order to establish a safety control device, for instance. So I'm assuming this will be a similar type of process.
I think the council will have more control over placing a stop sign versus a traffic signal, the signal.
Yeah.
Especially on Blue Star Highway.
Yeah, I would like
That's
this to
controlled
be
by
as,
the
be as
county.
objective as possible for us to make a decision on this would be my ask.
Understood.
Yeah, so we will act on this on Monday, I hope. Okay, let's go to our next agenda item. This is C, expanded outdoor area, page 50.
Mr. Cummins is gonna help us
Excellent.
out, and he's gonna be on the agenda for, I don't know, the next 30, 40 minutes, so.
Oh, excellent. Excellent, always looking forward to that.
Worried it's gonna fall off and find my feet here. But never done it this way, but I think it's a little easier than find out. Well, good evening, Mayor and City Council. You'll recall back in the spring, it was before you, as we were kind of gearing up for the kind of the tourist season, and businesses were asking, hey, are we going to be allowed to have expanded outdoor dining again in the streets? And so what we presented to you at that time is an explanation that your zoning ordinance actually requires any expanded outdoor dining in the right of way, which would include the streets, to receive zoning approvals. And certainly Saugatuck, like many other communities during the pandemic, worked quickly to allow expansion outdoors, kind of suspended some rules on an emergency basis. And so we discussed at that time that, you know, requiring businesses to go through the normal zoning processes right before the season would probably be challenging for them and for your city staff and planning commission. And so the council granted kind of some prosecutorial discretion to staff to continue as, you know, the status quo for the summer season, and then to work to align the code of ordinances and your police powers ordinance with your zoning ordinance and bring back a recommendation in the fall with the hopes that these will be worked out over the winter season in anticipation of next season. So that's essentially why we're back this evening. So what we've done is take your police powers ordinance as it relates to expanded outdoor dining in the street, all the work that you did before and all the regulations that you came up with for those expanded outdoor dining areas in the street, essentially taking all those regulations, putting them within the zoning ordinance, because there's some extra regulations that weren't in the zoning ordinance before. So kind of aligns everything. And then essentially, if you pass the zoning ordinance changes, then we would be making a recommendation to remove these other items from your code of ordinances. So essentially, you would have zoning approval as was required before, meet the standards that you had set for expanded outdoor dining in the street. The city council would still be responsible for giving permission through a revocable license agreement to actually use the public space. And then there would still be fees associated with use of the space as well. So the planning commission held a public hearing on the zoning ordinance amendment last month. they unanimously recommended approval and adoption of the ordinance with a couple tweaks to what's before you. The first being that there not be any kind of leeway or grace period for setup and tear down. That just be straight up dates of the dates that were set. And then they recommended shortening the season a bit from May 1st to November 1st. So happy to answer any questions.
A discussion item first. Ryan, thank you for going over that with all of us. I just want to address Christine's comment. I was on the original committee when it was first introduced as pop-up patios, and we went into great detail talking to all the restaurant owners and shop owners, and we came up with the idea of April 1st because the first week of April is a big week for Saugatuck because a lot of people come here for spring break. I know we all leave for spring break, but believe it or not, a lot of people come to our area for spring break. And if we have a random 60, 70-degree day, a lot of restaurants would like to be open that first week in April because of that reason. That's why after talking to lots of people and having lots of meetings and discussions, that's why we originally had April 1st through November 1st. On the opposite end of that, we want those tables to be out there during Halloween. It's a very big time for all of us. We don't want restaurant owners to have to be breaking all of that down on what could be one of the busiest days of the year in our area. If Halloween falls on a Saturday, for heaven's sakes, can you imagine all of the restaurant owners having to break down, all of their outside area on Halloween? That would not work out so well. And as far as the leeway, you just have to understand with restaurant owners, staffing can be an issue and they need time. If the weather is not so great and it's not a great time to take down that equipment within a day or two, I think it's fine to be able to offer up a 10-day grace period of when to get that equipment up or put away for the season. So that's all I have to say about that. And as far as the question in the ordinance, the dates haven't changed. So in the ordinance that's here, those dates have not changed.
Correct. So right what's before you is what the planning commission had a public hearing on, wanted to get the council's feedback on their recommendations for Monday's meeting.
Okay.
Because it looks like there's those
It's
10-day
the
grace
original
periods
date.
are already in there. It's April
And
1st to November.
it is in this ordinance currently is what it used to be. That part of it.
The April 1st to November 1st piece is, I don't believe there's actually any specific grace period built into your prior ordinance, and that's something that staff, that legal and staff had discussed actually adding in to work through those kind of issues.
I see. And then there's still the monthly fee. So if somebody chooses to just open up their outdoor space in June, they're only paying for the months that they use it.
Correct, yeah, they don't have to do April 1st, November 1st, it's whatever months they choose, and they're paying for that space as it relates to the street. Staff will probably be bringing forth some recommendation too at some point related to how to handle maybe the sidewalk seating, because there's not a charge for that currently, but that'll be at a later date.
Couple more questions. I don't want to take away from anybody else's questions, but if I could just get through these quickly. You're asking city council to every year approve all of these? No.
So, yeah, so what this would do would make sure they have the zoning approval. Once they have the zoning approval, unless there's a change as far as the site plan itself or they're adding extra seating, there wouldn't be a need to continue to go back and get zoning approval. And then the revocable license agreement, the approval from council, instead of that being a yearly revocable license agreement, I discussed with legal, having a longer agreement, to where they wouldn't have to come back to you over and over again every year. So where we land on that will be ultimately up to you, but we're trying to avoid this every year doing the same exact things and this cumbersome process.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, thank you. So the planning commission had a pretty healthy discussion and public hearing about this, as Mr. Cummings discussed. I'll say generally, everybody's excited about this concept, and it's been well received. The only complaints I've heard as a council member is that there seem to be ones that were put up that were never used or underutilized. I've heard that from a number of different people. But generally speaking, this has been a positive for the community. I think most people enjoyed it, citizens as well as visitors alike. In regards to the actual length of the expanded outdoor dining being put up, that was discussed, and the only change, well, two changes that were recommended by the planning commission. One is that the period start May first and go through October 31st, and removal of those shoulder weeks for equipment to be set up and taken down. And for me, speaking personally as my speaking as a planning commissioner, where I was going with this was that you can never predict the weather. The weather can be beautiful in the month of April. The weather can be terrible in the month of April. You just can't predict on weather. So I started thinking about, okay, what does the public works impact going to be if having these up at periods of the year when snow could be snow removal could be an issue. We did not have a public works representative at the meeting, but I'm very curious to hear the superintendent or the staff's opinion about, has there been an issue with snow removal? And I know that the ordinance allows us to remove that for street painting and things of that nature. And that was another topic of discussion, was actually line painting. Because the line painting typically doesn't take place until sometime in the month of April, I think, maybe yeah. So that was another consideration too, is to not have someone have to remove it to paint the lines, because you know some of these lines were not painted because the units were up already. So those were kind of the thought process around that change in the dates.
Yeah, Mayor, I know this has been a huge help to our businesses, and as a partaker of Oberon, I think Oberon Day falls somewhere in April, Madam, what? No, even March, even better.
Oopsie.
So, I'm just thinking about all our Oberon drinkers, and I remember sitting out there early on a beautiful day on a picnic bench in front of Wix, and the place.
Yeah.
And that's, when we first started doing this, it was to help our businesses through a very, very difficult time. And I think it has been well received. I think it has been well respected. I think they and council and city have learned from one another. And that's the good thing about working together. I think that those initial discussions that Lauren referenced way back, the number of people who were involved in that, who felt so passionately about it, and to where we've come, this has been nothing but absolute positive for our city. Luckily, weather-wise, we've been very fortunate. I think the last heavy storms have come sometime mid-March, maybe. It's been a while. So I really think it's a good blend of a good way to help out our business establishments. And they take the initiative in deciding now whether or not they want to do it and whether or not they want to pay for it. And that in itself has taken care of the issue of unused or not used. If an establishment's going to pay to have it, to put it up and to have it there, hey, if 5 people use it, if 50 people use it, they've taken that on themselves. So this has been such a positive for our city, and I think keeping it April 1 to November 1 is kind of a wise way to go forward. It's worked. There hasn't been a problem. I think corrections made. Go ahead.
Renee, yeah, so I just want to make sure, this has already gotten through planning, so when we're talking about the questions that Member Gardner had about the public works and stuff, planning has already approved this to be April 1st through November 1st?
Yeah, if you look at the recommendation.
That's
on
my
page-
understanding. I just didn't know why we were going back and talking about this. So we are already at a place where this has gotten through planning, and this would just be up to us then to approve, right?
Right, on page 52 is the recommendation
Yep.
from planning commission
Okay.
regarding the period.
I
And I do
understand.
want to emphasize that there are people that have expanded outdoor dining that also have public seating outside, which can be used at any time of the year that they choose to see fit. So this doesn't limit anybody's ability to use outside seating that they may have through a revocable license with the city. This is not specific to any individual property owner. It was generally speaking about the city itself in terms of impact on public works, and potential issues around line painting and.
But it did, this already passed through planning unanimously, correct?
Ryan, can you clarify that?
Yeah.
Because what I had asked that question, and you said that because in the ordinance, it's the original dates. And you said on page 52, there's a recommendation, but it's not in this ordinance. And you're saying it's up to us whether we pass what the planning commission, their changes, or if we leave it as is.
Ultimately.
Is that correct?
It's ultimately up to the council to decide what you want.
So, okay. let
the
me
ordinance to be.
Because I'm getting just as confused as the rest of the team here. I'm looking at 55, section, A standards, section 1755. No expanded outdoor dining area shall operate between November 1 and April 1 of each year. All items in expanded outdoor dining area shall be removed from the permanent space no later than November 10th of each year. It may not be installed until March 20 each year. So that creates that little buffer for, so folks can have the logistics. It seems to be what I'm hearing from a number of council members that April 1 to November 1st seems reasonable. But is this what was passed through planning, or is this the old ordinance?
The ordinance that went to the planning commission and they held a public hearing on is what's in your packet.
Okay.
And then I've noted in the report what their recommendation is, that
Right.
they've recommended those two changes. And so, based on the discussion today, we will have whatever ordinance form whatever you would like the ordinance to be in your packet Monday for your
Okay.
approval.
Okay, now, so what we're,
If you concur with the planning commission's recommendations, we'll make those changes and have it in your meeting packet for Monday. If you want to leave it as it originally was brought to the planning commission for a public hearing, then we will.
So you're saying right now, we have to decide
Right.
if we want to make the planning commission's changes or if we want it to remain what it was?
Absolutely.
So let's make that decision, shall
Wait,
we?
so- all right, I'm sorry, I need to understand this again. Are you saying that planning is recommending the date be changed to May 1st?
Correct.
That's the recommendation.
I
but
would
that's-
not be in favor of that. I think April 1st is reasonable. That's my view.
Okay,
but-
Gregory?
and what's your view on the removal of the period for tear down and stuff?
10 days, I think, I mean,
Okay, Gregory.
Okay, I understand where you're coming from. Gregory, thoughts?
The big thing that I heard about some of this was, parking or whatever, parking was an issue, but parking was an issue long before we had outdoor dining. And it's long before all of that. So I don't see how that's relevant. And I don't know how 1 month of, having it free would help to relieve any parking issue any more than we need relief on parking issues. So I don't have a problem with it starting in April myself. I really don't. If business owners want to pay for that space, let them pay for it. I really don't have a problem with it starting in April. Most of you guys really enjoy it, right, Christine? And I mean, and if they want to have it up in April, let them have it.
Okay, Holly?
We didn't have a problem with it before, right?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it starting, in April and, yeah, to Lauren's point, I think that's tight with Halloween. And, sometimes we have beautiful weather. I would just like to maximize businesses' opportunity to, I don't have a problem with it. I also know, I think it's maybe a shame that DPW was not included with your planning commission meeting, because that is a conversation that we had back in the day about, clearing for snow, and it could be the snow. So, I mean, it could be 80, it could be snowing. This is the place we live. But we are 100% tourist economy, and, I'm going to, vote with businesses that would like to set up.
Well, I think I know where you are.
Yep.
You're speaking with the planning commission's
Yeah.
changes?
Yeah, I do. And something that, that was brought up at the public hearing, we had a business owner that actually spoke up, and I've had some individual conversations with business owners outside of the planning commission meeting that were, which is something that probably business owners here know, is that after Labor Day, the socioeconomic profile of visitors to town and the shoppers changes dramatically. Ages go up, mobility goes down, and so forth. And the point that was being made was that some of these expanded outdoor dining areas take away parking for people who need to walk or can't walk quite as far. So it's kind of interesting point is that there's a change in the demographic of the people that shop here. And that didn't really enter into the decision that was recommended by the planning commission, but it was discussed by a couple business owners that that's a concern from their standpoint. Does that make sense?
If I can, first of all, I'm looking at the space of where all the outdoor dining was. I know Phil didn't do it this year. I highly doubt if he'll do it next year. And I'm looking at where all the shops are and all the restaurants are, and I'm thinking where the things were Butler Street, and this is mostly restaurants on Culver Street here and Wicks over there. Their corner doesn't really, they're not really in front of a lot of retail or where people would want to go in and out to go shopping. So I don't see how it really interferes with the retail stores.
Yeah.
You know, and how people can, I think the biggest problem with retail stores and parking in this town is that the owners, the managers, and the employees are parking in town. I live here on Butler Street and I see it every morning. These streets get filled up by 10 o'clock in the morning in the summertime or in the fall, even before the tourists get into town. So I think that's really the parking issue here that needs to be addressed before any other thing.
Yeah, and I would just say that there's different perspectives on this. That's the point here, is that there's people with different opinions about what's appropriate here. And the planning commission in this recommendation felt this was fair.
Garnet, I think I know where you are, but go ahead.
No, I've already
Okay.
voiced my opinion, April 1 to November 1.
Okay. There are two pieces from, well, first of all, you know, I'm not gonna presume to know how business in town operate. I mean, I'm not a business owner, so I'm not gonna pretend that I know what their demographics are. I'm not, nothing like that. There are two interesting points though that I think I'd like to hash out over the issue of like, what if DPW or Cal Lake, whomever, needs to paint? Or even more importantly, make a repair to asphalt, because I do know, having been in the oil industry, that asphalt season is in the spring and in the fall. So right when these are in the road is the time where you can get asphalt to make road repairs. So, you know, how have we had to deal with this before, where we've had to say, hey, sorry guys, I know this is kind of an emergency situation like we had over there. We're gonna have you move your stuff so we can make a repair, you know, or this street is scheduled for repaving.
Could
You
that
know,
be
and
included?
you know, and I'm sorry, but we're gonna have you clear it out for a couple days while we pave it and repaint it.
Is that in here somewhere in the contract that we reserve that right in
We
case
do.
of
We do, yeah.
Correct.
Yep, okay, so it's in
it
there.
says, yeah, the
So
department.
we have the ability to, under these circumstances, they're very rare circumstances, but if we need to say, we're sorry, but you know, there is an infrastructure work or public works project that needs to happen at this time, we can't defer it.
And if I may,
Go ahead, Helen.
I will say that I am a little bit uncomfortable, disagreeing. Planning, you know, we charged the planning commissioners to do the test, and they did the test and they brought this to us. I happen to disagree with that timing. I think that it puts a burden on our businesses, and frankly, and this is just a personal thing, but to me, April and October are when residents are able to go down. There's been times when we've just had a beautiful day in April and we kick off on a Tuesday and go drink at Wicks and it's great, right? And people want to be able to do that. But when I see that, I know that we've worked hard as a body to get it from April 1 to November 1, and there was reasons for that in COVID. And I think that now we just kind of have a new normal. But the realization that we would go against a planning recommendation is something that we need to consider for the council, that this was brought to us, and I want to make sure.
Yeah, I would,
fully understand those reasons.
I would only say that we had several meetings about this. We had a committee that discussed this. I realize it had to do with COVID, but it started the process.
Right.
It started the process of being able to have.
And we've been able to work
public
around it
space
with Public
used.
Works and everything.
And just my point being that it was just, you know, a discussion that was just had that had to do with redoing the ordinance and all of that. And this was something that just kind of came up at that meeting, without all of the discussions that we had going back
understand.
to
Okay.
all of that.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead, Ryan.
I know you like data. So
Yeah.
as a point of information, last time we studied this, the expanded outdoor dining areas took, consumed about 5% of the downtown parking spaces.
Okay.
5%. Okay, that's good.
So it could be up to 6 or 7.
And of course,
more
everybody,
businesses join.
just like any of us get inconvenienced anytime there needs to be a water disruption or whatever, right? Like, that's part of the deal. If there's something that needs to be
Sure.
disrupted, or, hey, be on notice that we're gonna be painting, you know, and it's gonna be April 2nd, sorry, the guys couldn't get there until then maybe you don't get to set up in time for that. So we have to have that flexibility as a city, I would say. But I think that it's important to respect our business owners, and they're paying us for the privilege to do it. And if we're not having any significant, disruptions since then, I just don't see a reason to change it from April 1st. My personal view.
Okay. Yeah, the one part that I do feel fairly strongly about is trying to like, you've got like 24 hours to get this stuff out of here the day after Halloween. I mean, that seems, somebody could lose a vendor or a vehicle could break down, they could have a staffing issue, that seems unfair. So a bit arbitrary. So, yeah, I hate to, I mean, I rely heavily, on the guidance from our committees, I really do, and I really respect what they do. But I also, I like it when people show up and that are in business and share the views from a business person, because I'm not in the hospitality business. And I appreciate hearing from members who are also in the hospitality business, because I think I get a better feel for the backstory and in fact, how you run a business post-COVID. And in a town that kind of prides itself on being a beautiful setting outdoors to enjoy the, nature. So, I hate to do this because I do respect what our planners do greatly, but I do feel, I can sense a strong consensus among the council to leave this ordinance as it is. That's the sense I'm getting from the people around this table. So I think you can bring it to us as it is. If somebody wants to offer an amendment with these 2 points, they can try to run it up the flagpole. We'll see what happens. Somebody else can offer the ordinance as is. And that gives folks a few days to let us know. It gives people in the business community, people that feel that parking's an issue, to let us know over the next few days. I mean, it is one of the beauties of doing these workshops is, it does allow us to sense check things and get these issues out there so we can hear from our constituents. So I would suggest, we've got the ordinance. It doesn't need it would need it would need an amendment to go this route or strike it down and just do it as is. You hear what I'm saying? I mean, you get what I'm saying, Ryan? And Ryan, see? We're gonna leave it as is. Yep. Leave it as is, and we can either, somebody can motion to amend with these 2 points, or somebody can motion to do it as is. I think it's fairly straightforward.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Clarification.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the ordinance, it's already adopted. The ordinance,
Yes.
right? So we are adopting the ordinance as it's written.
We're going to be adopting the ordinance that's in your packet on Monday.
Got it. And so this amendment was just from planning commission to change the dates to May 1, October 1 with May. That's where I'm, so let me.
It's not in the, yeah, the
Yeah.
new dates are not in the ordinance currently.
Correct. So on page 52.
Yeah.
Basically, you're saying changes to the ordinance, so the date, change the date from May 1 to October 1, and removal of any period for tear down and setup. But yet in the actual ordinance on page 55, item number 17, Roman numeral 17, it's April 1 through November 1, and no later than November 10th. So that's I think where the discrepancy is the recommendations are not aligning with what's in this proposed ordinance.
Correct. And sorry if I wasn't clear or for any
Okay.
confusion. So, the planning commission obviously can't adopt an ordinance. They can only make recommendations. So
Okay.
they held a public hearing on the ordinance that's in your packet tonight. That's the ordinance that we noticed and they had a public hearing on. As a result of that public hearing, they felt comfortable recommending that ordinance, but wanted to recommend to you that you make those 2 changes.
Okay.
So that's what we're here tonight to discuss,
Understood.
whether or not you want to make those changes and adopt all of it then in its entirety.
Yeah, I mean, for what, I think it's fairly simple. I mean, there are basically 2 motions that could happen. The one with amendments as it's stated here as the sample motion, or someone could motion just to strike and its amendments to section so just motion to adopt ordinance, or would it be to adopt it, or would it be just to not change it, or
The
would this
ordinance,
fail?
the ordinance that's in your packet is amending the zoning ordinance to include all of that information.
Okay,
Because it's taking everything that's in your police powers ordinance in chapter 96 related to expanded outdoor dining in the street and putting all of those regulations then into your zoning ordinance.
so I guess the simpler answer is just vote it up or down. Right. Just vote it up or down.
Exactly.
Okay, so I'm gonna have this on the agenda. We will vote it up or down on Monday. Personally, I'm gonna try to have a word with a few of the planners and see how strongly they feel about this. I'd like to understand more what their process was. I did not attend
I
that meeting.
concur with Mayor. I didn't
Yeah.
attend the meeting and.
I
I was
attended.
on the Zoom call. You were on the Zoom
You were
call
on the
too,
Zoom call?
when it went down.
All right, well, I'd like, I'll probably try to reach out to a few of the planners and and see how strongly they feel about this. But, we'll put it in the packet as it is for Monday, and we'll simply be in a position to vote it up or down. And that doesn't, then just the ordinance is good and we don't need to do anything, just carries on. Okay. Yep. Okay, we all clear? Yep, all right, great. Okay, that was C, we have D on 59, which is expanded outdoor area ordinance repeal. So is this, did we cover this now, or is this part and parcel of this?
So this is related to your previous item. So essentially, on Monday, if you as a council pass, the zoning ordinance amendments, then, staff's asking that they repeal, the section related to expanded outdoor dining in chapter 96, because it will have all been in the zoning ordinance at that point.
Okay. Any discussion? Everybody clear on this now? Clear as mud? All right.
Took a minute, yeah.
Okay. That takes us through, the items that are, here for Monday's meeting that we will have as new business. That takes us to item 6E, which is, our STR presentation. And Ryan, once again, you're still stuck up there.
Well, this one's gonna be, a little longer probably. So,
All right.
well, what I'm here to do, this evening and your short-term rental task force, chair, Holly Anderson is here as well as the, more formally, present, the city council with the short-term rental task force report. So I'm here, tonight to kind of just do an overview of the report and all the work that's been done over the last several months by the task force. The full report is in your meeting packet. And so I didn't include these slides purposely because I want the report to stand on its own and really to be the focus, because that really has the detail and the great work that's been done. I know some of you have heard this presentation. We did this presentation to the planning commission to formally present it to them as well. So, if there's at any point you want me to speed up or slow down, happy to do that. So,
To that point, Ryan, I don't want to be rude, but I will have to leave the meeting at 5:45, so I will turn it over to the mayor pro tem if that's the case. I've read it, but I do look forward to your presentation, but just full disclosure, I have to go pretend I'm setting broken limbs and stuff over at Bittersweet at 5:45.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, Mr. Cummings, there's no expectation that council is going to take action on Monday, just to be clear for the expectations of audience and council.
Exactly right. So this is simply a presentation of the task force work and their recommendations. The next steps will really be that the council would choose to add further discussion on these recommendations to a future agenda and work through them further. So no action will be asked for on Monday, and really no discussion even today unless you choose to have it.
I have a question. So, this has been presented to planning, and then now the next step is for planning to come to council with a recommendation.
Partially, yes. So I'll touch on that at the end, but yeah, essentially, I mean, the planning commission has purview over certain zoning ordinance items, but some of these items relate to policy positions that are yours outside of zoning that really you would, as staff, need your direction on, and that you could choose to provide before planning commission returns.
When is the planning commission going to take this up and present
Their kind of first discussion and getting into the recommendations is going to be next Thursday. Their timeline will be their timeline. I'm not sure how long they will plan to take.
So now it's been since like February of 2023 when this all started and we hit and went to the short-term rental task force. But at that point, there was a timeline where it was like, okay, then our, McKenna should wrap up by X, and they're going to do their report. So I don't remember where we are on the Gantt chart of. So my understanding is that once this report has been delivered by McKenna, that it goes to planning. Planning makes a recommendation to council, and council chooses. So is that not my misunderstanding that?
Well, that's happening with zoning related items. Yes,
Okay.
that process is, yep,
But there's not a deliverable date for them to get that to council at this point?
correct.
I understand.
All right, so to kick it off, so, that's what I did, Jamie. So, and I set this up for anybody that's maybe not familiar with the work that's been done for a while, so bear with me. But essentially, the Planning Commission, back in February, Councilmember Baldwin, as you indicated, they had made a recommendation to the council that a short-term rental task force be formed, and the council, very clearly, concurred with that recommendation. And also made clear that a task force should be formed with facilitation and assistance by a professional planning firm and by a professional planning consultant. And the goal of the task force was really to identify and prioritize current short-term rental concerns, the issues, opportunities that were available for short-term rentals, and then objectives held by the residents, property and business owners of the city, schools, your public safety, and other community stakeholders. And so the task force was tasked with gathering data and resident, property, and business owner feedback in the form of forums and surveys. And then their ultimate responsibility was to develop a balanced report and formulate recommendations back to the Planning Commission and City Council. And so that's essentially what we're presenting to you this evening. So as a reminder, the makeup of the task force, he spent a lot of time kind of discussing the makeup and what was best. And so the task force had one council member and 2 planning commissioners, and then a variety of different representatives, one from the retail, restaurant, lodging business owner community, another from a short-term rental property management group, somebody from a residential zone who maybe felt more positively about short-term rentals, somebody from a residential zoning district that maybe was more concerned about short-term rentals in their neighborhood, somebody from the real estate or realtor community, and then somebody from a commercial zoning district who was not the owner of the short-term rental. So the mayor worked hard with the planning commission chair and myself to interview a number of folks and ultimately made recommendations to you on who to add to that short-term rental task force committee. Once that work was complete in May, with the assistance of McKenna Associates, who is Michigan's largest planning firm, the task force got to work, and they met twice a month and discussed and really dove in deep into a lot of different topics. They covered, took a look at, what are other Michigan communities' policies? How are they handling short-term rental issues in their communities? The short-term rental task force looked at state level data on housing markets. The task force looked at, right now we have a short-term rental ordinance here in Saugatuck, and we've been doing work around that, and we have enforcement. So the task force looked at, what the city is currently doing. The task force looked at our assessing and zoning data, just trying to get a feel for how many short-term rentals we have in the community. The task force spent a lot of time really listening to public comments from residents and stakeholders, and then ultimately held a town hall and some public engagement surveys to get a sense of where the community was at. So I'm going to kind of just touch on very high level each section from the report and kind of some key takeaways. Again, the details are really in the full report. But the first piece of the report talks about community comparisons, and again, looking at what are some common things that we saw other communities are doing as it relates to short-term rentals. And so the first item was residency requirements. And so each community that the task force looked at ultimately has some sort of requirement that there be some official or agent within a certain distance that would be available to respond to issues for short-term rentals. And in fact, your short-term rental ordinance has that exact same rule as well. Right now, somebody has to have an agent within 45 miles of the city to respond to issues. Another key takeaway was occupancy. Every community was setting occupancy in some way, typically with the building code. Your court ordinance sets occupancy for short-term rentals through the property maintenance code. Charlevoix was kind of an interesting situation in that they were actually capping occupancy at a high level of 10 and saying that no matter what the building code essentially says, the max anybody could have in any particular short-term rental unit would be 10 people. Certainly if they were, didn't have enough room, maybe they only had room for 6, it was going to be 6, but 10, even though it was a larger home, that was going to be it. A registration schedule. So registration was a common element with other communities as well. We have a registration program here, although other communities were looking at a yearly or annual registration, whereas the city of Saugatuck right now is on a 3-year period. And then another common theme was really a tenant code of conduct, or what we've kind of called it in the process as a good neighbor policy. So some sort of guide that's provided to the tenants or the folks that are using the short-term rentals to kind of just remind them that, hey, you know, you're in a residential neighborhood. There's some things that you need to be mindful of or should be mindful of, you know, your noise and taking care of trash. Some of those more nuisance related issues and trying to get ahead of those as people are visiting. So McKenna Associates took a look at the market to kind of, you know, are there any certain trends or certain, you know, takeaways that we could get from our market analysis? And obviously the caveat to this kind of a data is that, you know, reasons for data trends aren't always clear, and correlation doesn't always necessarily mean it's the causation. But with that in mind, certainly there was there's been a clear increase in the number of short-term rental registrations that are occurring each year. So, you know, back in 2020, the city was looking at around 50 registrations a year. Now we're, you know, closer to 100 or so. And so that's for a variety of reasons. We have turnover every 3 years. You have to renew a certificate. We have new short-term rentals that are starting in the city. And then we have situations where there's a change of ownership from one owner to another, and that short-term rental then has to be put in the new owner's name, and a new inspection has to occur. The increase in interest in short-term rentals has been concurrent with the median sale price for homes in the city nearly doubling. So kind of seeing similar trend lines, the number of short-term rentals going up and the sale price for homes. The increase in short-term rentals have been accompanied by a decrease in conventional rentals available. So more conversion to short-term rentals, less long-term rentals available. Some of the data is suggesting that owners, maybe instead of selling their home, when they leave, are choosing to keep them and hold them as short-term rentals. Kind of a key trend here as we look at our market as interest rates are rising and home values are rising, with the caveat that there's a lot of other costs for short-term rentals beyond just paying your mortgage. But if you look at the mortgage payment each month, despite the increasing home values and interest rates, short-term rentals right now are still profitable, although that gap is decreasing. And short-term rentals are perhaps becoming less profitable at the current home prices that you're seeing. And so that may have a natural impact on the market. And then owning a short-term rental in Saugatuck is more lucrative than a long-term rental. So short-term renting is, you know, you're gonna earn more money. So from a residential data analysis, a lot of the discussion around with the task force ended up on really focusing on, you know, what is our number of short-term rentals, maybe saturation levels in our residential zoning districts. The commercial zoning districts weren't the main concern that the task force kind of landed on, and weren't what folks were hearing concerns about from community members. It was really the residential zoning districts. And so we dove deeper into that data. We took a look at, okay, how many, you know, parcels in your residential zoning districts are either improved parcels or have condominiums, something actually on them. So these aren't vacant parcels. These actually have, these are usable properties. And then how many of those parcels have at least one short-term rental on them, knowing that there may be situations where there's accessory dwelling units and extra short-term rental certificates. And so data there on that chart kind of gives you an idea of what percentage of properties at least have at least one short-term rental in each of those particular zoning districts. And so, for example, community residential includes the Hill. So that's at about, you know, 32%. If you need a map or something along those lines to help you with kind of each of those particular zoning districts, happy to provide that detail to you as well. One of the big pieces of the process was doing a town hall. We had we sent out postcards, let folks know about the town hall. We certainly promoted that through our other channels here at the city. The task force chair did a letter to the editor to let folks know, and we had a good turnout at our town hall. So we had over 100 folks attend. And so kind of two parts to the town hall. There was an opportunity to kind of more informally have discussion with task force members and the McKenna Associates staff and myself. And then we had a more formal town hall where folks were actually able to come up and give formal comments. And so some of the takeaways that McKenna noted from that were that there was agreement that short-term rentals provide tourism opportunities and housing, which increase spending at local businesses. So folks were seeing some positives related to short-term rentals in that regard. We need to do some further education on what an actual good neighbor policy is, what that actually means. Common theme throughout and all the public engagement was a feeling that there's some nuisance-related issues related to noise, debris, garbage, and then occupancy limits were a concern. And then there was also concerns that those nuisance related issues, that there wasn't sufficient, enforcement occurring around those nuisance issues. It was some comments related to the concentration of short-term rentals was perceived to reduce kind of that neighborhood feel of some of the residential zoning districts. The STR should be classified as a business and seen as a business use and not just simply a residential use, because it's, more commercial in nature was the thought amongst attendees. And that we needed further regulations, maybe around those residential properties, but maybe opening things up more in those commercial areas. The short-term rental task force, as you directed, also conducted a survey, and so again, really good response to the survey. Over 600 responses. We at least monitored to the extent that we could for any sort of stuffing of the ballot box. There was 5 situations where IP addresses were repeated to a level that we thought somebody's trying to skew the data here, and so those responses were removed, which gave us what we felt were 621 responses for analysis. 39% of the respondents were full-time or primary home residents. 39% of the residents were part-time, so pretty split there, and then 21% of the respondents, were not a resident. So the breakdown from there, about 27% of those that participated in the survey lived on the Hill. 20% identified as living downtown. And then we had a breakdown of how folks identified as it related to the river, and then 22% were not identified as not being a city resident. So some key takeaways from the survey that was done. Again, some common themes. Both full and part-time residents, non-residents agreed that short-term rentals have the benefits of supporting tourism and business in the community. So we're seeing some positive impacts from the short-term rentals being here in the community. Now, unlike full-time and part-time residents, non-residents selected short-term rentals. They had concerns about selected increasing their incomes as a top benefit. There was also some concerns by some non-residents that home prices were increasing to the point that it was difficult to buy a home in the city. But the residents, full-time and part-time, again, those nuisance issues came up through the survey. There's concerns about noise, concerns about parking, and then concerns about a lack of enforcement of those items. There was support amongst full-time, part-time, and non-residents. There was support all around in actually, strengthening the enforcement measures. So folks wanted to see more enforcement related to the regulations. And then, and I'll touch on this a little bit later in the presentation, because the task force kind of wrestled with the caps question, but full-time residents were more in favor of placing caps on short-term rentals, at least in certain neighborhoods, while part-time residents were opposed to the policy change. And again, I'll dive into that in a moment. So your task force took all of this information, all this analysis, all this deep dive, and they really kind of identified, hey, if we're going to make recommendations, what are we trying to solve for here? What are our ultimate objectives? What do we want to make our recommendations based on? And so the first was to aid and support the city of Saugatuck's tourism industry. That was the primary objective. Second was to preserve the character of Saugatuck by enhancing the small town feel. And then third, to effectively enforce short-term rental ordinances. So enforcement certainly made that list. So these are, next slide, Jamie, is getting into the actual recommendations of the task force. And so they're kind of broken up into sections. The first big piece of the task force felt that there's a lot of opportunity to do some education, create a website, create a frequently asked questions page, kind of have a one-stop shop where folks can look at what the regulations are, what the requirements are, maybe perhaps what short-term rentals are actually in the city, and then develop that good neighbor guide to hopefully get up front and do some proactive education of those property owners that have short-term rentals, as well as folks that are actually visiting the community. So as it relates to noise, the task force recommended that you as a city council review your existing noise ordinance and maybe expand, increasing kind of maybe more traditional quiet hours, partnering with the sheriff's office on appropriate review of the noise ordinance. The noise ordinance is fairly old. There's been a lot of not necessarily legal challenges to your noise ordinance, but there's been a lot of case law over time that's developed related to noise ordinances, so there's maybe time to do some updates there. And then the second recommendation was perhaps the planning commission could use its zoning ordinance to look at residential zoning districts and how maybe we could create some better restrictions in that regard on the zoning side. So then we got into some fire safety recommendations, and so, the task force engaged with the fire department and Chief Janik and Deputy Chief Mannels and their team, and asked for the fire department's recommendations on, how the fire department was seeing the short-term rental program kind of, roll out in the tri-community, and what were their ultimate recommendations. And the task force was, very receptive to the fire department's recommendations to the point where they actually, adopted and included all of the fire department's recommendations. So the first recommendation was request that the Saugatuck Fire Department transition to annual inspection. So if resources weren't an issue, what can we do to, make annual inspections of short-term rentals, occur instead of the every 3-year inspections that are occurring right now? Second recommendation was really related to that occupancy concern. The fire department expressed concern about some of these homes being quite large and having 16, 18 people, in these homes from an occupancy standpoint. They had concerns about if there was a fire and emergency, how would they respond and get that many people out of a residential dwelling? So their recommendation was to actually set a maximum occupancy of 12 persons per dwelling. So no matter the size, if it's a larger home, it's going to be set at 12. Obviously, if it would be set at less occupancy, then they'd have to meet that, but 12 would be the absolute max. Third recommendation was to encourage the city of the Village of Douglas and Saugatuck Township to continue to try to have regulations that align. There's a lot of agents and property owners that operate in each jurisdiction, and so to the extent that we have clear, concise rules for each community, their recommendation is to continue that kind of a practice. And similarly, not just ordinance-wise, but also fee structure as well. The fourth recommendation was to explore reducing that mileage requirement for the agent to go from 45 miles down to 15 miles, so somebody to be even closer than what they are now. The fifth recommendation was to encourage regulating short-term and long-term rentals identically. So right now, we actually don't have like a long-term rental, the same kind of regulations for long-term rentals, so they encourage looking at something similar for that. And then require the short-term rental certificate to be posted in the window or visible in some way. So right now, there's concern from some folks that they don't always maybe know if somebody actually has a short-term rental certificate or they're actually registered. So this might be a means to say, one, that they're registered, but two, what is their actual occupancy set at? Seventh recommendation was to encourage the review of assessing monetary fines or fees to property owners who are in violation. So, situations where we have violations, make sure that we have fines and fees that are actually, at a level that would discourage, hopefully, folks from maybe not following the rules. Review the existing fire district fees structure and recommend amendments. So this is a situation where the fire district feels like they want to do maybe some study themselves to make sure that they're recouping all of their fees and all of their costs that are involved in inspections and maintaining a short-term rental program. Kind of an interesting recommendation was to require the short-term rental property owners to actually provide some sort of proof that their insurance actually, is aware that they're using it as a rental dwelling instead of maybe just being a owner-occupied home. 10th recommendation was to basically keep in mind the fact that, hey, we have commercial kind of use, almost a commercial use inside of a residential structure. And so a home that was built for residential use, or maybe a smaller owner-occupied family versus, maybe the occupancy or the level of visits that are occurring from a short-term rental. The next set of recommendations related to trash. And so the short-term rental task force felt that maybe we should have an increase in the number of trash containers that are required for short-term rental property and have that based on occupancy limits in some way. So that way, based on the frequency of pickup that we're seeing now, maybe more trash cans would help prevent some of the trash issues. Along those lines, they recommended that the city administration look at updating the contract with the trash hauler to maybe do more frequent pickups with recycling and trash, or to look at maybe making that pickup occur maybe more frequently just during those tourist months when we're likely to see more use of the trash. Next recommendation is related to a compliance officer. So the task force recommended that the city administration explore hiring some sort of dedicated code enforcement or code compliance person to address short-term rental concerns. So that person would be, looking at, addressing complaints that come in, related to noise, trash, occupancy, or other violations of the actual short-term rental ordinance itself. So then some general modifications that the recommendations that the task force made. First was having some sort of public database available to where, if a neighbor has concerns related to what's occurring at a short-term rental, that maybe they're able to kind of go to the property owner or the agent that's managing the property and try to kind of handle that neighbor to neighbor instead of maybe involving your local government officials and trying that approach first. They recommended encouraging the creation of a general call-in line. So maybe we have a situation where we're not getting something resolved, but we have a non-time sensitive issue. So maybe there's a call-in line that would be dedicated to handling specific concerns. In fact, there's some third-party providers that actually do provide this service where your staff wouldn't have to be here at the office to take the calls. They could go to somebody who logs them and also can reach out to the short-term rental property agents after hours when staff aren't here. Third recommendation was to encourage city administration to view areas where there's maybe a need for no parking signs on this side of the street. So this is a situation that you've already kind of taken a look at and provided some direction on. In situations where we maybe have a lot of short-term rentals, a lot of extra parking on the street, emergency vehicles that can't access these properties. So maybe we should have no parking signs to make sure that we can get emergency vehicles down the street. The fourth recommendation was to encourage the city administration to review the ability to revoke licenses if there's multiple violations that are confirmed. Maybe a 12-month period that they be revoked. Recommendation 5 was request that the city administration review the feasibility of requiring short-term rental property owners to actually post their certificate number on the actual online listing. So right now they're issued a short-term rental certificate that has a license certificate number on it. So the ordinance could require that they do their rental posting no matter where it's at, that they actually put that in the actual description. Everybody typically provides a description of the property, have that right there in the description. That way you know it's an actual registered unit versus somebody that's maybe not compliant with the current program. Recommendation 6 was to request the city administration explore hiring a third-party agency in the city to help manage its program. So there's third parties that could manage everything from taking applications to enforcement, or simply providing data and helping to identify folks that maybe aren't registered, or there's some that provide kind of call-in services, like I mentioned as well.
I'm sorry, Ryan, may I interrupt for 1 second before you move on to the tax part? So I'm seeing a lot of recommendations about enforcement and hotlines and a person to do this and obviously that person will need a vehicle, this and that. Was there any recommendation about how we're going to pay for all that?
No. Task force took an approach of if resources weren't an issue in a dream world, what would be best practice or what would we ultimately do? So,
but if we're going to treat this like a business, I mean, I think if we're right now, what is a fire inspection is $175 and a 3-year fee is $300. So an annual, my point is like, they are nowhere near covering. They're not just on things that you have to pay right out of pocket, much less you don't have time to walk around and do all this stuff. So, I mean, I understand what they're saying, and of course we've heard about this enforcement thing or whatever, but without any meat on the bone as far as, what it should cost for an actual business license, which is exactly what you're running, because let's be clear, that's not a home, that's an investment, that's a business. And I don't know of any other business that a city would host and not require that they cover, if you're a bar, you don't get to just hang out there and not pay your taxes and pay for, your inspections and all that stuff. But for some reason, we don't have anything. Okay, I understand. I just want to make sure that we're going about all the recommendations. Great recommendations, but nothing about increasing that $300 for every 3-year fee. So
and they did, certainly discuss that. And what was interesting about the discussion was that there was some that said it could go either way, in the sense that right now, it's a 3-year registration, and you're inspected, once every 3 years. And so the thought was that, well, if you're being, inspected more often, maybe you're not gonna have as many issues. Maybe the fee doesn't need to be, quite as high. And that was what some folks thought. So I think that's exactly what you as a council would have to say is, hey, depending on whatever these recommendations are, you say, find a way to make sure that this cost is passed on to the actual operators of the short-term rentals instead of on the city taxpayers. Certainly, that's exactly what we'll do, is an analysis on what those fees should be, certainly.
Thank you.
So one piece of the short-term rental task force, certainly wrestled with and discussed,
RC, can I stop you for a second? The mayor has left the building.
Yep, the mayor's,
And so, for the record, Lauren Stanton is taking over as.
all right. So short-term rental task force, one thing that they wrestled with, amongst themselves, and also, certainly gathered public feedback on is whether or not there should be some sort of caps on short-term rentals. And so just to cover a little bit more from the survey, the citywide cap, and the survey results showed that the citywide cap was not overwhelmingly supported by the community. So overall, a city cap in Saugatuck was not something that the community was desiring. But where we saw some interest in caps is from full-time residents. They were in favor of caps in certain maybe residential neighborhoods or zoning districts that were residential in nature. Whereas part-time residents, interestingly, opposed such a policy change. You can see a chart on the right there that kind of shows the inverse. So the short-term rental task force agreed with the community. And the next slide, Jamie, and they agreed, they did not support a citywide cap on short-term rentals or a lottery system for short-term rentals. So that was not something that they recommended. It kind of deadlocked a little bit as far as a formal recommendation went. Is there were some task force members that felt strongly that city should impose a cap on the number of short-term rentals within residential zones or neighborhoods within the city. Again, residential zones or neighborhoods. Some task force members felt strongly about that, and there was others that felt equally as strong that there shouldn't be any caps. That the city should maybe focus more on addressing some of the enforcement and nuisance-related issues, and maybe implementing some of these recommendations before taking such a step, and that some felt that a cap wouldn't ultimately solve the concerns that they were hearing. The other thing that the task force kind of wrestled with was, who do we kind of listen to more as it relates to what folks want to see? Do we listen to those full-time residents? Do we listen also to the non-residents? Because there's other stakeholders who may be non-residents like that own businesses here. And so who do we kind of, put more weight on as far as their opinion that they were giving? And ultimately the task force, wasn't able to come to an ultimate agreement on that. And so the task force in the end, acknowledged that further review and analysis of instituting a cap on the number of short-term rentals may be required, but the consensus from the members was that there wasn't a definitive direction on caps achieved, at least from their body. So, next slide is a thank you slide. So a huge thank you to the McKenna team. They have a deep bench there. They had a lot of different folks from their planning firm that helped work on the task force project and ultimately the report. So huge thank you to them. But more importantly, perhaps is a big thank you to all of the volunteers who spent numerous hours during their summer here at City Hall, but not just at City Hall, reviewing meeting packets, talking to all kinds of stakeholders and attending, hearing all of those comments, reviewing it. So they are truly to be commended for taking on a tough task. All of them, I think, said at the end that they had learned a number of things throughout the process. I think all of them had changed their position in one way or another, at least on something throughout the process. And so, and they did it very respectfully, very openly, very open and transparent process that anybody can still go back and watch any of the meeting videos, look at any of the meeting packets. They're all there. So big kudos to them, as well as your task force chair who took on the task of leading the charge. So kind of next steps here. Your planning commission is going to discuss, zoning related items and what items they want to take up to do some work on and make an ultimate recommendation to you on as it relates to zoning. And then it will be up to you as a city council to really set some direction for your staff at a future meeting on what you would like to take up from a policy perspective.
anybody want to have any discussion about this? Obviously, we're not deciding anything, on Monday.
There's no
Um,
motion for Monday or anything.
Correct. But is there anything anybody wants to ask, of Ryan and, the task force? Because Holly Anderson's here. I was on the task force as well.
I just want to say, great job. I was very impressed with, planning. Give me a big round of applause. Holly, very impressive, with your participation, and great, lots of public, conversations and reaching out to everybody. You've done a great job, leading the crew.
Thank you, and thank you to Ryan and Jamie and, our city manager who did a ton of work to support this behind the scenes. I'm just gonna add a couple of quick things. So to Helen's question, the task force really focused more on the what instead of the how, because it really wasn't a group that could figure out how to do all of this. There was definitely a sense that we have to capture our costs, so, and figure out how to do that. One thing, the fire department, actually Chief Janik did think that it would be cheaper on a per inspection thing to do annual inspections because there's just less to find. So the devil will be in the details. I think once we have a sense from council of, the policy changes that they're interested in exploring, then, it's like, well, how would we make this work? And there are just a gazillion ways that you just have to look at all the unintended consequences. I do think that the data is, we got a good start, especially with some help from some residents on getting the residential data sorted through. That will be really critical that we really agree on what we're gonna track and how we define things, and so that we can keep that up, which will be really key. In terms of, I think the task force did a great job on nuisances and, how do we enforce and, how are we going to kind of capture our costs and the governance around this. We didn't though, and this gets to the caps. The issue we heard throughout, is the neighborhood density issue. It's sort of the neighbors and the neighborhood issue, which really is density. I mean, I think we can do all these things and they will help, but it is not going to put more neighbors in the neighborhoods and address that issue. And I think council's going to have to talk, planning will need to talk about that, council will need to talk about that. And then the part-time residents versus full-time residents, because there's a fairly big difference, and council ultimately is going to have to decide who has a greater voice on that. One other quick thing, Charlevoix has been through this. They put in a cap, from a cap perspective again, if we want to dig more into that. They put in a cap 3 years ago, sort of after this was all done. I just thought, you know what, I'm going to call them and see, and I got the planner on the phone. And they have enough data now to say that they did a similar residential cap, so just those areas. It took them 18 months to get to it. It's been very successful. Like all of the gloom and doom stuff that people said that would happen if you did that didn't happen. Housing prices have held, housing values have held. So I think it's worth, I said this to the planning commission too. I hope the planner there said he'd be more than happy to talk to the city, share their knowledge. I think it would be really wise for us to do that and maybe talk to some other cities where it's more of a qualitative discussion versus data that we got during the report. So big shout out to the to council for authorizing the task force. It was, Ryan said, it was a great team of people. I mean, Lauren can, chime in. And I think there's really the heavy lift is still ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And then also, great report too. And so the STR, of course, you didn't make a lot of the recommendations or, all of the recommendations because that's what the planning commission did. And a lot of them are great, but, this isn't the time to talk about them, but I don't agree with all of them. And I know I've had that discussion with you as well, but I think just because, there's a few things in there I'm not crazy about, this is amazing. You guys have done such a wonderful job.
Right.
And I think the other thing to keep in mind, it's gonna take a while. I mean, even if, regardless of what we decide to do, we'll have to phase it in. I mean, you can't bite off all of this at once. And it will also, it's gonna require change management for everybody, for the short-term rental owners, for people, the citizens, I mean, for everybody to understand what, what we're gonna change, why we're gonna change it, sort of what the process is, where they can learn more, and sort of what the timetable is, how they can expect that all to roll out. And that will be, I mean, it's just the communication of this will be a significant lift. So there's, it is, it's exciting but a lot to do so. Absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, Mayor Pro Tem, thank you. And thank you, Lauren, for representing the city council on the short-term rental task force. Ryan, thanks for your work. Holly, thank you, and congratulations on your win yesterday. Looking forward to serving you on city council. And also thank the short-term rental task force members. This is thankless work. But I'm excited by the report. The planning commission received the report at our last meeting as well. And for me, as your city council representative to the planning commission, my goal is going to be to break this down, identify those that can be done quickly with assistance from the city council. That's more of the policing action needs to go to the city council. The zoning ordinance, which is what the planning commission will be focused on. The key here, in my opinion, is going to be to keep this moving forward and keep it on schedule. The community will have an expectation that, okay, all this work got done. Don't let it sit on the shelf. Take action. And that's where I'm going to be focused is what can we actually take action on? I appreciate the cost issues too. That's been brought up by a number of citizens. I have some ideas about that, but we'll be talking about that as we get into the weeds on this. I just think it's a good start. I think the community took a great step forward in this regard. I hear a lot of good things from community members. I think they're looking now for action. So that's what I'm going to be focused on.
So if I may, Madam
Pro Tem.
Mayor Pro Tem. Took me a second. It's a lot of M's. First, yes, thank you to Holly, to Ryan, to the task force. It was a heavy lift that we did ask them to do. I also am going to be very results driven at this point, so I want to stay on task. And I think just to reiterate, everyone kind of knew my view back in December when this conversation first came up. I thought just council and planning should task it, and a fan of democracy, and that was not to be, and everybody wanted a task force, and so I went along with that. Great, like democracy, even when it doesn't go my way. That's how you know you're a fan, right? So then with the task force, I wanted everyone on there to be a resident, and that was shot down. So I think we're coming up with some things now when we get to the end here where we're not really sure how we feel about whose views matter more, a resident or an investor. I have some very clear ideas. We are here to serve the residents. Anybody who's an investor that is not a resident, guess what they get to do? They get to go and vote somewhere else. We are beholden to the people who put us in these seats, and we answer to them. That is my view, and that will be the view that I take going forward in all of our deliberations.
Anyone else before we excuse Ryan?
Just real quick, what's wonderful about this new process, I know it's very hard for folks because it takes a while. This is the thing with municipal government in general, it's slow. And, that's a hard thing for folks. What's great is that now you have without data, you're just another person in an opinion. Now we have data, and that really gives not just the task force, but also your planning commission, the ability to really move forward with the data that's been provided and to determine them. Are we looking solely at full-time reps? That's a heavy lift now for planning commission. And I think, y'all started that. So, I kudos to everybody. Volunteering that much time is commendable. And folks,
Anyone else? All right, Ryan, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you, Holly.
All right, now we're moving on to public comment on anything you would like to speak about this evening. Anybody in the room?
Just to stretch your legs. Some might consider a surprise when you find me. Dan Fox, City of Saugus, Michigan. I would like to echo Councilperson Lewis's comments. Without data, we get nowhere. We all just have opinions. It's hard to back one thing up. value one thing against another. I'd like that same standard applied to that airport property. We need that. I went around the room, everyone in this room could tell me exactly within probably $5,000 how much their house is worth today. Go back around the room, the same people, and ask them how much the airport property is worth, and nobody has a clue. That's just not acceptable. I mean, that's a start. I mean, it's just a transparency starting point. So it applies on both counts. In fact, I think that approach, and those consultants were terrific. That approach worked very well for the study of a very complex issue, and we came up with interesting thoughts, recommendations, findings, and all the rest of it. And without a lot of drama, it's amazing all by itself. So anyway,
Thank you.
I'm a data guy too.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Dan. Anybody else in the room wish to speak? If you could move your microphone down just a little bit, great.
Yeah, I'm Marcia Casper, City of Sagatuck. Yeah, I'm a data gal. And I would just like to say that you can, as Garn said, you can chew gum and walk at the same time. Having an idea of what the property is worth, and I just Googled the acreage that's for sale in the township. So I have an idea, and it's not multi-millions. It may not even be worth $1 million, but I'm not the expert. But we can do due diligence, for the trails and opening them up, and also get an evaluation of the property. We can do those at the same time, or we can, do the due diligence on the trails and wait, in the future. Because as I said, once you sell this property, it's gone forever, and you always have the opportunity to sell it in the future. You don't have the opportunity to get it back once it's gone. And this is pristine property. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else in the room?
Hi, Christine, 449 Water Street, Sagatuck. I just want to thank everyone. I know I feel like a broken record up here over and over again with the outdoor seating and the sidewalk seating and all the other seating that it happens. I just want to, we're 100% tourism. That's why people come here. I feed a lot of people 365 days a year. I'm open year round. I think it's very important to start focusing on those kinds of things, to giving the people, a safe place to eat outside. I mean, obviously my spot is a very nice end corner that works out very well. But for many years, I was the dead end of town, and no one made it all the way down there until the barge and Retro Boat came in. And now the town is starting to expand that way. And so we need to keep moving in that direction too. So I thank you for always listening to me. I really appreciate it. And thanks again.
Thanks, Christine.
Thanks, Christine. Anyone else in the room?
Sagatuck Township. I live within a half-mile of the airport property. I think selling it would be just a violent disservice to what it could be. It's like we wouldn't be able to get it back. I've seen what's happened at that storage facility that went up on the corner of 63rd and Allegan, and it's awful, and I don't think it's used, and I don't know why we had to put a bunch of garages on that wooded corner. I don't see what service it's done to our community. We have a bus stop right there. Kids wait at the end of the street every day for a bus, and I can only see increased traffic there. So everything.
Thank you.
Lena DeYoung, Sagatuck. I am on the airport property subgroup of the Parks and Public Works. And I wasn't here at the beginning, but I do want to say that I love data too, and data is a lot more than just financials. And so we've been working on this for a year. It didn't just come up. We have been looking at it for a year, and we requested studies that were done that I think are both included in the packet, that has a lot of data about, what good that property does. And it's not just financial. So if there's not a financial piece in there, it was sort of like the short-term rental task force. You know, it was more about the what and maybe not about the financials. So thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else in the room? Online, I see Vicky's iPhone.
Little slow on getting the mute off, sorry. Vicky Cobb, 987 Lake Street, Saugatuck. I just want to add my thanks to the Parks Committee. And I think it's so important to have community involvement. And the city decided to form this Parks Committee, and it's loaded with really talented people who know how to research and know how to make decisions. And I hate to see the hard work and the effort that they've put into this questioned every step of the way, particularly when they're bringing information forward with a lot of research behind it. And you empowered that committee to do the research on your behalf. So I just hope that the respect they deserve is shown to them, and their ability to sort through a large amount of data and make very good recommendations to the city council are listened to and followed. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicki. Anyone else online? Jaden? Okay, so that moves along to correspondence. I believe we have something in the packet from Dan Fox. Correct? Everybody had a chance to look at that. On to council comments. Let's start with Garden this time.
I'm all set, thank you.
All set, thank you.
Holly, nothing at this time, thank you. Gregory.
Thursday, Bill's will not, that's tomorrow, Bill's will not be open with their regular menu, but they will be open at 4 o'clock celebrating their 21st anniversary. So that's one of our favorite hangouts here. We love Bill and Brandy. And so they'll be open at 4 o'clock with hors d'oeuvres, and they're a little, as many of you know, I'll be collecting my annual t-shirt there, and just want to give them a shout out at Bill's there.
Awesome. Thank you, Gregory.
I just want to say congratulations to the newest councilman, well, the incumbent, Russ Gardner, Mr. White, who I have yet to meet, but I'm looking forward to, and Holly Anderson. Congratulations. Running for office is it's a unique experience, and you feel pretty exposed, and it's definitely something that's not for everybody, and it takes some courage, and I'm glad that people are willing to step up and do it. We can't function as a community without it, and we're not going to agree on everything, and that's part of the deal, and that's exactly why there's 7 of us and not 1 of us. So,
Right.
but I appreciate everybody who takes the. It's a lot of effort, and I know it was into it, and I'm on a bunch of it. I do appreciate it. Thank you.
I echo Helen's comments. Congratulations. Thank you so much for serving. Veterans Day is on Saturday. Yeah, correct?
Yep.
The service that they have, what time is that? Remind me again.
Is it at 11?
11.
Yeah,
Okay.
11.
Just wanted to remind everyone that that is happening on Saturday.
And veterans eat for free at the Whatnot Inn all day on Saturday. So the Whatnot Inn is giving free meals for all veterans
Yeah.
on Saturday.
So hopefully, you all can take part in that if you can on Saturday. So I'll be there as well. So, at this time, could I entertain a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All right, all in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Adjourn.